to the Science and Chill podcast. I'm your host, Brady Holmer. My guests today, and yes, I said guests plural, are Michael Brandt and Latt Mansor. Michael is the CEO at Health via Modern Nutrition, a startup company selling nootropics and ketone supplements with the mission of redefining the limits of human performance, metabolism, and longevity. Latt is the research lead at HVMN and is responsible for coordinating clinical trials on their products, as well as conducting internal research on up-and-coming products for the company. I invited Michael and Latt on to discuss a brand new product that HVMN is soon to be launching in January, Ketone 2.0. HVMN was the first company to commercially market an exogenous ketone ester and is now launching a new version of this product designed to be consumed and utilized by the masses. We delve into the science of Ketone 2.0, the potential use cases for Ketone 2.0, and some of the innovations and ideas that made this revolutionary new product possible. We also discuss some of the therapeutic applications of exogenous ketones in general, which range from diabetes to cardiovascular disease to traumatic brain injury, or TBI. We also talk about the potential for exogenous ketones to be used as a nutritional tool for athletes to promote recovery and prevent overtraining, something that has been investigated in some recently published peer-reviewed studies and an area I find quite exciting. This was an awesome conversation with two guys who are both scientifically and business-minded, which makes the way that they think about nutrition, health, and performance very unique. And it was a pleasure to have both of their perspectives on the frontiers of exogenous ketones and the exciting future of their company. A few announcements before I get to today's episode. First, if you are willing, able, and interested in helping support this podcast, please consider doing so by becoming a supporter on Patreon. This is the best way to make your donation have an impact, and you can join many other monthly supporters and listeners in helping keep this podcast up and running, and most importantly, innovating. There are also some other support options for this podcast as well. As always, you can make a one-time donation through PayPal or Venmo, both of which are also extremely valuable to me as a creator. You can find links to all of these support options and more in the show notes below, or by going to bradyholmer.com/donate. Thank you so much to everyone who chooses to support the work that I do and the content that I create. Another way to support the podcast is to check out the sponsors. Currently, we are supported by Element Electrolytes, a tasty and nutritious electrolyte drink mix that you can use for workouts, fasting, or as a general dietary supplement for sodium, potassium, and magnesium. I have been using Element for the better part of a year and consume around 1 to 3 packs per day as additions to my water. They have several awesome, tasty flavors including citrus salt, watermelon, raspberry, and orange, all of which you can find on their website. You can check out Element and purchase some of this product by using the link in the show notes below. And last but not least, if you didn't know, I have a weekly newsletter that I send out every Friday in which I break down a recent study that I find interesting and worth sharing with my audience. It's just a short but information-packed email where I try to distill the most important parts of impactful research into something fun and digestible to end the week. If you would like to subscribe to this newsletter, you can do so by following the link in the show notes below or going to bradyholmer.substack.com/about. And if you subscribe, you'll receive the very next email, but you can also find previously published emails on my Substack profile as well for your reading pleasure. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Michael Brandt and Latt Mansor. Latt, Michael, thank you both for joining me today. And if I could just ask you both briefly, whatever order you would like to decide to do that in, to just introduce yourself, kind of talk about where you're currently living, a bit of your maybe academic and business backgrounds, and then what your current roles are at HVMN.
Mike.
Sure. Well, first, thanks so much for having us on, Brady. This is awesome. Love your podcast. Been following your work for a long time, and it's great great show you got here, and appreciate you having us on.
Sure.
I can share. I'm happy to share my background, and then pass the mic over to Latt. So I'm Michael Brandt. I'm from Chicago originally. I went to Stanford for undergrad. I studied computer science and product design there. And my first job out of college, I was a tech guy. I worked at YouTube back in the, if people remember Gangnam Style, that was the first video to ever get 1 billion views on YouTube. I was a product manager at YouTube at that time. So I trained as an engineer, computer scientist, and then I got into biohacking. So I was super early wearing continuous glucose monitors. This is before there was Levels, NutriSense, Super Sapiens, any of that stuff. You had to literally go on like eBay, European eBay, and like order it through the mail, and like maybe get it two weeks later. Order a few of them in case a couple of them would get lost in the mail. So doing super early biohacker stuff, like doing long extended fasts, intermittent fasting. We were exploring around with nootropics and just thinking through how do we improve the human body as a system. And it's really interesting time, right? Because we have now this proliferation of sensors in and around the human body where we're able to measure our outputs. We can see our blood glucose levels. We can see our blood ketone levels. We can see how many footsteps we're getting. We can see our sleep score. We can see our heart rate variability. You can really start thinking about, if the human body is the most advanced piece of technology you'll ever own, then you can start thinking about the human body as an API, which you can see different outputs on that system, and then you can do different things on the inputs. And we've always been an inputs company, right? So we've always been thinking through, okay, how do you have the most interesting new inputs to put in the human body as a system to drive certain outputs for performance, longevity, daily energy, all that kind of stuff. So engineer turned biohacker turned getting into nutrition, and along the way I've also become a runner. I'm maybe around, I don't know, we're like plus or minus. We should race someday, Brady. You're probably faster than me, but you might be faster than me, but I don't know.
They heard it here first. The challenge. We'll do it someday. We'll meet up at a race.
Yeah. I think I don't want to knock it. You've been running a lot longer, and I think have a lot more accolades there. I got into running the last few years, distance running, marathoning, and have been able to make pretty quick progress, I would say, because I do a lot of training where I'm like measuring my heart rate, and I'll do a lot of runs that are like constrained where I won't exceed a certain heart rate, like Ketone method as it's called. I track things like my cadence. I do a lot of barefoot running. I apply a lot of these I would say like engineering or biohacking type of principles into running, which has made me, I think, be able to make quick progress. But I think that's more personal stuff. I think most accolade I'm most proud of is just the community that we built around people that are really curious about hitting new heights of personal performance and health and all that.
Awesome. And then Latt, can you introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I'm not a runner, so do not ask me to run. We can lift weights though. We can go to the gym. I'm good with that. So I'm Latt Mansor, research lead for HVMN. Originally from Malaysia. I did my undergrad in biotechnology from Nottingham University in the UK. I did my master's in biotechnology as well from Columbia University in New York. And then I worked in a pharmaceutical company in New Jersey called the Medicines Company. And then I moved to Germany, the German office in Munich, worked for them for a year before I went back to school to finish off my PhD in physiology, anatomy, and genetics. My thesis was in diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and hypoxia. And that was from University of Oxford. And I finished in 2015. And then I started working for a health tech startup in Singapore. So I went back to Southeast Asia, worked in a diabetes management sort of company called Hallmusk. It's very similar model to say Omada Health or Livongo, those kind of companies, which sort of almost like diabetes prevention programs and allowing health technology to, like Michael said, to track your sleep, your food, your steps, your glucose, so that people are more aware of where their metabolic state is at any time, rather than having to visit a doctor every 2-3 months and have a snapshot of it. So I'm a big fan of preventing chronic diseases, because I do believe a lot of these diseases are preventable. They are a matter of lifestyle choices, a matter of situational sort of circumstance that people can easily, make informed decisions once they have enough information and education. So now at HVMN, I oversee all the research collaborations with all the institutions, whether it's sports team trying to figure out a new protocol for performance or recovery, to universities who are trying out our products, especially in exogenous ketones in different therapeutic areas. I'm also the principal investigator for our phase 2 SCTR $6 million grant by the military SOCOM to look at cognitive and physical performance using exogenous ketones.
Awesome. And that was, maybe one question that I could have saved for the end, but I was curious, just from a perspective, I know you all are doing research kind of with other universities because they have been using the ketones produced at HVMN, but are you doing some internal research within the company as well?
At the moment, we have something lined up. We are planning to definitely build our own research capacity. Obviously, we are ultimately a commercial company. We don't have a lab or anything. We have to collaborate with researchers. But yes, we have been having this discussion about having our own research pipeline. Our own sort of what are we interested in looking that we don't have to depend on what other people are publishing. Why not we as the pioneers look out for what's coming next. That's one. And another initiative is who knows, we might be able to provide some grants or some support for researchers and let them compete with the most interesting ideas. That's definitely on the table.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very exciting. So thank you both for giving a little bit of a background, and you definitely both bring some unique perspectives and unique training to the company of HVMN, and that is something that I think I really enjoy about the company in general. It's not just a team of scientists or a team of, say, tech guys, but it's kind of this blend of tech combined with business acumen and science that really makes it a unique company. And so I did talk a bit with your colleague, Jeff Wu, about the sort of company philosophy and all the things that they're doing. I believe that was episode 27 of my podcast where I interviewed him. And, I know that HVMN started out as sort of a nootropic supplement company and then became, the first company to commercially market the ketone ester. But you all have definitely gone through a rebranding in terms of the ethos and approach to nutrition. I think even that came with the name change. Now you would call yourselves Health Via Modern Nutrition. And so maybe we can start with Michael and just sort of talking about in general, when we say health via modern nutrition, or just what modern nutrition, when we say that phrase, or when you say that phrase, what do you kind of mean, or what do you think about when you say modern nutrition, and sort of how do you try to implement that into the company, whether that be the content you all put out or the products that you're making?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where nutrition is going is towards personalization. When you have everyone increasing access to all of these sensors to track our biomarkers, a little bit of what I was saying earlier, you can track your caloric input, you can scan any product and it'll download the exact macronutrient breakdown into an app, and you can track your sleep score, and you can send your cheek swab to 23andMe to see what your get your genetic profile, and then you can take that and you can upload it to other sites and get even more specific drill downs into what you should be doing for do you have more slow twitch or fast twitch muscles? How does your body respond to peanuts versus eggs versus cholesterol, right? You can see all these personal factors on your genetics, on your personal behavior, and it's natural from there that people are going to want to personalize. The other aspect of personalization, of course, is different goals, right? There's a difference between wanting to run a marathon versus wanting to live to be 200 years old versus wanting to, have more energy right now today. There's some correlation, right? I think generally, if you exercise, you'll check a lot of those boxes. But maybe a topic for another episode. There's such a thing as like over exercising to where you're like a peak Olympic performer, that's maybe not the best recipe to live forever. And at the same time, if you want to live forever, maybe you should like, go for a walk and garden and like be active every day, but you might not be an Olympic level performer. So there are some trade-offs that people are going to want to make. And it all comes back down to personalization. Like, who are you? What are you made out of? How are you responding to the world around you? What are your goals? And in that new world of personalization, then modern nutrition becomes having access to the best inputs to be able to drive the outputs that you're going for. And that's where we're most interested is our flagship, like the main thing that we're doing right now is exogenous ketone. I think there's so much to that. It's like we think of it as a nutritional primitive, the way that if you invented omega-3 or caffeine or collagen, it's like take collagen, for instance, right? It's this primitive that people can use for all sorts of different things. Some people care more about their hair, skin, and nails. Some people care more about their joints and more athletic repair types of applications. It's this primitive that can be applied for all these uses. I think ketones is as big or bigger, and it's a primitive that people can use. So it's not like a one way to use it. Our goal isn't like, oh, we want to make a product for triathletes, or we want to make a product for longevity, or we think about it as like a nutritional primitive layer, and people can use that into different applications. And so that's what we think about when we think of modern nutrition. And so the open question of, hey, well, after ketones, what would we do next? We have some ideas there, but I think there's a massive opportunity just around ketones. So that's 100% what we're focused on now. It's like Nike had to become a great brand for track and field, and they spent like a decade doing that before they made a single basketball shoe. So I think over the long term of HVMN, it's like, yeah, what are the other novel new primitives that we could bring to market? But in the more like short to medium term, it's that I think ketones is the like most innovative thing in a decade plus in the nutrition space, and that's what the short to medium term focuses on.
No, I totally agree, and I love like the perspective that it's kind of this supplement. I guess we can refer to it as a supplement, but like a ketone, there's so many different use cases for it. It's not like something like, say, well, I don't even creatine, something like that could be used for many different things, but it's like you really kind of pigeonhole yourself if you're just going to make one supplement marketed, say, towards Tour de France cyclists, and that's the only people who can use it or the only people who can afford it. Like, that's not necessarily going to be something that's going to be able to uphold your company and like drive this super growth. But like with a ketone, throughout the lifespan, people can make use of this, whether you're an athlete or not an athlete, depending on whether your goal is longevity or performance. It's like this all-around supplement that you could almost find a use for in any situation. And I almost wonder whether that is just because of like ketones. I know you use the word primitive and not necessarily in this term, but like ketones are like this ancient like molecule that once existed and that we can create on our own. But I wonder if that a variety of uses and benefits comes from this fact that it's like this conserved molecule throughout like evolution that we're now like repurposing through modern nutrition, I guess, like as you guys are. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think there's that kind of double entendre on the word primitive, where I think of it as in math or computer science types of areas, right? If you're like defining a mathematical system, there'll be certain primitives, right? There'll be like it'll be like a set, and then there'll be like operators that you can do on that set, right? So there's like certain primitives. Like Euclidean geometry has certain primitives, and then everything else like derives from that set of primitives. Same in computer science, you have like an integer and a string, and there's like these primitives upon which everything else is built. But it is interesting, right? Yeah, we think a lot about how ancient humans used to have more elevated ketone levels because they were not eating a ton of processed carbs. And if you think about it, right, it's really hard to get pure sugar back, 100,000 years ago. Like you would have to attack a bee nest or something. Like you weren't finding like, there wasn't just like table sugar, right? You had to like work for it.
Yeah.
So you didn't have all this like abundance of sugar. You didn't have you were moving around a lot, walking, jogging 3, 4, 5, 6 miles a day, maybe more. There's a big hypothesis around like humans being great at exhaustion hunting, like just we can outrun like a lot of other animals, and over time, not over short distances, but over long distances. Anyway, so we're eating less sugar, we're a lot more active, had a lot more elevated ketone levels. And so in that sense, like ketones are this primitive, it's this like, we're using the best of modern technology to help humans return to this ancient state.
Yeah, for sure. And then Latt, before I want to, get into talking about Ketone 2.0, but you come from a background doing your research in, different diseases, metabolic diseases, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and things like that. So, how do you kind of view this this modern nutrition philosophy in that light, in terms of, maybe just envisioning and thinking about therapeutic approaches to treating these different diseases through like the modern nutritional approaches?
Yeah, sure. I think that's very in line with what I've always believed in, even when I was working for health tech industry, trying to prevent diseases. So in terms of health technology, they create a lot of devices for monitoring, for tracking, and data collection, and that's very important. But equally as important, as Michael says, is the input. What are you putting into your body that gives you that output that you can track and monitor? And modern nutrition is exactly that. Clearly, like our knowledge, our ancient knowledge, or primitive knowledge around ketones has always been there. But what are the technology advancement that can bring us back there, but also adapt to our current lifestyle, our current technology advances? So exogenous ketones is one way that we can still sort of make people slowly understand that, okay, you can still have carbs, but now you can have elevated ketones and enjoy some benefits of it. Over time, maybe reduce the carb intake, reduce the risk of diabetes, reduce the risk of obesity and cardiovascular disease. But overall, this technology, this modern nutrition, allow people to be more flexible with their current lifestyle, because I think we as humans are very habitual. We are habitual creatures. So once we are used to a lifestyle, a comfort zone, it's very difficult for us to change. And therefore, modern nutrition, in my eyes, is an approach that does not aim to just change someone or change someone's behavior. It allows someone to adapt a new behavior on top of what you already have and make it a little bit better.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, because I'm sort of agreeing with you in terms of like, it's very hard to change habits, and it's also very hard, if not impossible, to change like the modern environment. I mean, we're not going to change the modern food environment in terms of the availability of processed foods, and
Exactly.
similar to things like I think about this a lot in terms of like sleep, an area that I'm very interested in. It's like, we can stress, get enough sleep and get enough sleep consistency and sleep quality as you can, but like in general, people aren't going to change. So maybe we need to design interventions that can allow people to not sleep a lot and also function at this like
Yeah,
this high level,
yeah.
rather than say change sleep. Okay, well, if you're only going to get 5 hours of sleep per night, what can we do? What other inputs can we add on top of that to make sure that you're not just going to derange your metabolism and your cognitive function and things like that?
Exactly that. So it's like, if you're not going to get enough sleep anyway with your lifestyle, certain people, they work long hours and all that, like what methods are there to reduce the stress, reduce the anxiety, reduce the cognitive impairment, reduce the risk of maybe oxidative damage? Like those are the things that can sort of help. And I think one of the biggest challenge that is underrated in chronic diseases are essentially compliance, adherence, because chronic diseases develop over time, more than a decade before you even diagnosed. So like same thing, if you want to fix it, cure it, reverse it, it will take equally as long, if not longer. It's a lifestyle. So I think compliance and adherence to it, it's what's important. And therefore, I think creating an approach that allow people to slowly adapt and fight with that inertia, and at the same time sort of allow your body to adapt to that new you, one day at a time, and overall compound that effect.
No, definitely. I think that's a rational approach. You may get some kickback in terms of people, I think, will a lot of people like to think about doing things like, say, the hard way and thinking, oh, like maybe this modern nutrition would be like a shortcut because you're not really making people change behaviors. But I think your approach is acknowledging the limitations that are inherent in many people in terms of behavior change. I mean, even the most dedicated among us, have trouble changing our behaviors. And so this is just kind of a smaller step way to maybe nudge people in like the right direction and get kind of metabolism back on track.
And the context has just changed too, right? You take something like jet lag, right? There's no like it wasn't even possible to travel like 4 time zones in the day. You know what I mean? Like you couldn't.
Right.
I want to go from like New York to California in a day. It's like that never happened until like the last century. And okay, so we're just not going to fly anymore. Like, what do people mean when they say like, oh, let's go to basics or do it the hard way? Like, I don't know. We're all pretty like, it's generally a net plus that we're using a lot of technology. We can be really efficient. Everyone's on their laptop. One thing I've heard I kind of like is that remote work is a video game. You're just staring at this glowing rectangle, clicking on different things, and like some permutation of keystrokes makes you $1 million or gets you published in a journal, and some wins, gets levels up your character in World of Warcraft. Some permutation like drains your bank account, like go to jail, whatever. Like, but it's all this like great online game. And okay, like, yeah, people weren't staring at these like glowing blue light rectangles before either. So like, it's generally a plus, right? It's like we can get amazing productivity without even leaving our homes. But yeah, what are we going to do about that? Like, how are we going to adapt to that modern context? And then I would say nutrition should evolve to try to get us back to the roots of who humans were, but it might not look exactly the same. It might rhyme, right? It might not be literally the exact same, but it might be like running on a treadmill and drinking ketones instead of like chasing an antelope on the savannah.
Yeah, I mean, everything we do in sort of that respect is like, I mean, it's kind of like the whole thing about like the paleo lifestyle. And, I always just found it like funny and like slightly ironic when people are, tweeting or talking about their Paleolithic lifestyle, but it's like you're on Twitter tweeting about it, or, you're eating paleo, but you went to the grocery store to get all your paleo food. It's like, well, yeah, sure. It's like, it's our modern paleo, but it's never going to be exactly like the real thing, but that's okay because we're in a modern environment and we can kind of revisit these concepts and things like that. But obviously we have to modify them. And that's okay. Again, there's nothing wrong with our modern environment. It's a blessing and a curse. As you mentioned, Michael, everything's kind of this simulation now in a way, but that's what we got to live with at this point.
Yeah.
So taking us now to Ketone 2.0, I really want to talk about this. So I have also had several episodes on my show where I've discussed exogenous ketones. So in episode 6, I talked with Dr. Brianna Stubbs, who used to work with HVMN, about exogenous ketones, kind of potential applications for performance and aging. So it's not maybe particularly something we need to go into in depth, but I can just link out to that. But I do, want to mention HVMN. They were the first company to market the exogenous ketone ester, which was the beta hydroxybutyrate, the monoester. And now you have a new product that is soon to be released, or maybe, out in this space. And it's Ketone 2.0. So maybe, again, we can start with Michael here, and then we can delve into some of the science. But can you talk about what Ketone 2.0 is, and maybe, if you'd like, maybe how it contrasts to the original ketone ester?
Yeah, I can give the high level, and then we can double down into some of the more specifics on it.
Sure thing.
The full backstory here was that in the people have known about ketones for 100 plus years, right? There are instances in the early 20th century of people doing ketogenic diet and people were having seizures, and that when people had ketones present in their blood, they were able to reduce instances of seizures. So people have known about ketones for a long, long time. In the early 21st century, early 2000s, DARPA, and maybe everyone knows DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Association. They do all sorts of like badass stuff. Like they invented the like early internet, and a lot of like, really cool technology that we use actually came out of DARPA and the US DoD. In the early 2000s, DARPA put together this program called Operation Metabolic Dominance, and they were looking at advanced advanced nutrition for warfighter performance in cognitive and physically demanding missions. And they basically did early proof of concept around exogenous ketone, a drinkable ketone. It was extremely expensive. It was, I think, thousands of dollars a dose, and it was very crazy tasting, like not palatable. So a lot of like the early folks who have tried like early ketones are like, yeah, it tasted like nail polish remover or something. It just tasted like terrible. Like couldn't even stomach it. DARPA basically did that research and then basically left it on a shelf for a while. And then HVMN in 2016, 17, we started looking at this is when we were doing like intermittent fasting. We were getting a bunch of press coverage and like, oh my God, because I was at Google, which a lot of people know like overfeeds their people. It's like free meals, free buffet, free snacks. And I was, oh, this ex-Googler is starving his employees. Not true. It was never like forced fasting, but a co-founder and I and a few of us on the team did do like 7-day fast and like, regular intermittent fasting. So anyway, when we're doing all this stuff, measuring our ketone levels, we spotted, oh, ketone. There's something in the literature that, this ketone exists. And so we productized ketone version 1, re-engaged with the US military, and sold to a bunch of teams on the Tour de France and got it rolling. It was still semi-expensive, right? Like, I have it on my shelf here. It's ketone version 1. It was $33 a shot, and it still tastes pretty crazy. You could stomach it, but it tastes like bad vodka. It's like not awesome tasting. And that rolled for a couple of years, and then we faced the aspect of it just being really expensive, and we wanted to make this a nutritional primitive for everyone. So we went back to basics and retooled the supply chain and rethought what we even wanted to bring to the market on this. And then, basically spent the last 18 months developing ketone 2.0. So the key difference in the molecules, ketone 1.0 was this ester of BDO with BHB. So that was very cool, but that process of esterizing, it sounds like very obvious in retrospect, but like the ester doesn't help anyone. Like it actually adds a ton of cost. And what we've done for ketone 2.0 is we just took like half of that. So like half of what ketone 1.0 was an ester of these two things. We took half of that, which is just the BDO, and we've productized that. So we've developed IP around it, really good formulation. It tastes way better. It's way cheaper. We brought down the price by 2/3. And I mean, I think this comes from a little bit of our maybe just like more nerdy upbringing and stuff, where I think we kind of over-engineered version 1.0. We went with like a more complicated molecule because it like seemed cooler and had more like, you could like patent more stuff around it, right? Versus like the more simple answer. It kind of reminds me of like 8-track players versus like regular cassettes, if people know that example. Like sometimes like the most advanced technology isn't actually the best one for the market. People actually just want like the simple or affordable one. So we for version 1.0, we had this I mean, it worked, right? Like it was a really good proof of concept. We sold millions of dollars of it. We got a contract with the DoD, sold it to a lot of great athletes. Basically like prove to ourselves, I think, first and foremost, and also to, I think, a lot of the market that there's something here. And then that's when we went back to the drawing board and retooled for ketone 2.0.
Awesome. And so I definitely want to talk a little bit about then kind of the structures and the actual product itself. And Latt, maybe I'll defer to you on this one. So the ketone ester, it was the BDO, butanediol, and the beta hydroxybutyrate. So this new product, Michael, as you mentioned, is just the BDO. So Latt, in terms of like metabolism, when somebody would take this ketone, what kind of happens as the molecules metabolize in order to elevate the blood ketones? And so how would like maybe the pharmacokinetics of the ketone 2.0 differ from 1.0 due to the different molecular composition?
Sure. So the ketone monoester, BHB, is esterified with BDO, and when you take it, the gut esterase would break that bond, that ester bond, and the BHB will go straight to your blood, hence why you get the spike of BHB, while the BDO will get metabolized in the liver and produce BHB. So you get, half of the molecule spike your blood BHB quite high, and then the other half is used to sort of maintain higher elevated blood ketone levels over time. So as for the ketone 2.0, the BDO on its own, it's exactly the same how half of ketone monoester is metabolized. But if you are just doubling that dose, sort of like compare it dose to dose, what we have seen is that you definitely don't see that high spike within half an hour. You know how ketone ester in half an hour you get up to 3 to 5 millimolar. We definitely don't see that. We saw a significant increase for sure after half an hour, above 1. Now we're talking about 0.5 gram per kilogram of body weight. So you get around above 1, but then it will continue to increase up to 2 to 3 hours. It peaks around 2 to 3 hours, and then it stays in the blood. For our internal study, it stayed in the blood above 1 after 6 hours, which is much longer than the ketone monoester. Now that is at rest. So that's the caveat. If you're working out, I would assume that that time frame would decrease. So I think in that sense, it will be much more practical and feasible for anyone who doesn't need that high of a BHB level, as well as the prolonged period of elevated ketones. So therapeutic users, that is the perfect setting, because 1, you don't need to keep topping up. 2, it stays stable around 1.5 to 2.5 for many hours. So I reckon it will stay longer than that, because I had to like prick myself every hour for 7 hours, and I thought that was enough.
One way to think about it is like, there's optimal zones. So in a lot of the literature, which we can get into around like recovery and other benefits, these benefits are shown like above a certain level of blood ketone, and beyond that, it's like unclear. Like, do you actually need to like have this massive spike, or is it better just to be in this like optimal zone for like a longer period of time? So it's less of like, oh wow, look how high I can get my blood ketones with this like novelty. It's more like, oh, look at how does it actually just keep you in the performative zone for longer?
Yeah. And in terms of like in the literature before the paper, the famous Cox et al. Paper 2016 that showed an improvement in performance by the ketone monoester, that has been sort of popularized by a lot of like sports team and researchers and all that. And then later on, I think it was last year and this year, 2 papers were published, one Dear Love and the other one's McCarthy et al. So they both showed, well, one of them showed that if you go from 2 millimolar to 4 millimolar blood BHB, the oxidation rate actually doesn't increase as much as you go from 0 to 2. So it's exponential and then sort of diminished return. That's one. The other paper showed that the higher the BHB level, the more it affects your pH, your blood pH. So it becomes more acidic. And on top of that, if you are exercising at the same time, the accumulation of lactic acid with the lowered pH by the BHB eventually gives you a higher or increased cardiorespiratory stress markers like heart rates, gaseous exchange, and heavier breathing, and all of that without the improvement. So it makes you feel like it's harder for you to exercise, but you're not getting an improvement, but you're not doing worse either. So it's like a unnecessary burden that you're putting on yourself.
Yeah, sure. I think there's this kind of misconception maybe that, and this kind of comes naturally along with sort of the almost like the gamification of ketosis in some way, where you have all these measurement devices and people are like, oh, how high can you get your ketones? Well, yeah, I mean, it's nice to see maybe like a 4 to 5 millimolar, but what, is that any better than a 1.5 to 2? Probably not, at least, based on what you said in terms of maybe the physical performance aspect, maybe the cognitive performance aspect. I mean, if this therapeutic range just lies around like 1 to 2 millimolar, that's then this product in general, by keeping you elevated in that for, say 5, 6, 7 hours, much more beneficial than just seeing, as I did kind of when I did my experiment a couple weeks ago. I did all these different ketones and I saw this huge spike after an hour. And then after 2 hours, I was just back down to say my normal 0.5 millimolar again. So I think the extended release, I guess you could say, is lower levels for a longer amount of time, also preventing you the need to kind of redose after just a few hours and take multiple servings of this thing throughout the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Another way to think about it is blood BHB, like millimoles per liter per dollar.
Mm-hmm.
Like what's the most economical way to get to 1.0 millimole?
Yeah,
isn't that right? Because like wow, I can get super high, but it costs me 3 times as much. And yeah, like what utility is that? Sorry,
and that,
I didn't want to cut you off.
Well, that was one of the that was one of the downsides of maybe the original ketone, and then even some of the ketones that are marketed now, is like their cost. So I guess in terms of cost, like what Ketone 2.0, say what's going to be like the cost per serving, maybe the estimated cost per serving for the Ketone 2.0.
Yeah, so we announced Ketone 2.0 a couple months ago, started collecting emails on our wait list. We got up to 33,000 plus people on our wait list. We opened
That's
for
great.
very, very limited community pre-sales. We let, I think, like 10% of people off the wait list, sent it out to certain community VIPs. Brady is on the way, and response has been crazy. We're doing our full public launch in January, so right now it's on just like community kind of early access. The pricing on it is, so if you buy it in a 3-pack, then it's $40 a bottle, and each bottle has 10 servings. So it's $4 per serving. And I want to be really clear on it. So like the serving is 10 grams of ketones. So 10 grams servings for $4. Our Ketone 1.0 had 25 grams and it was $33. Right. So it's a little bit of like moving parts here. Basically, we reduced the cost by 2/3, and then we also reduced the serving size. So we went from a $33 serving to a $4 serving. We reduced the price. We didn't reduce the price by 10x. I wish, but we reduced the price by 2/3, and then we also reduced the serving size. And the rationale behind that, so like why 10 grams instead of 25 grams? The reason is this: is that okay? If you're about to run a triathlon, or you're going to pour this into your bottle for to drink at T3 in your or sorry, T2 in your Ironman, yeah, maybe the full 25 grams is what you want. If you're Navy SEAL, Ironman, like you would still want the full dose. But as we're transitioning this into more of a like daily nutritional primitive, where you're having it in the morning for a AM ketone energy boost, a lot of people are, they do like a 16 and 8 eating window. And in the morning, before they like officially crack their eating window, they'll like sip a ketone and have black coffee. Yeah, ketone is technically caloric. Technically, you're breaking your fast, but like you're not spiking any glucose or insulin. It's a very chill way to extend your fasting window. And for that use case, like you don't need the full Navy SEAL Ironman dose. So, and it's a lot easier for us to communicate. I think customers or community appreciates it a lot more when it's like, for normal uses, have 1 serving, and for like your marathon, have 2 or 3 servings, versus saying like, hey, normal serving is this, and then for everyday use, have a fractional. People, I think, don't like fractions. It's like, what's this? Like, I gotta take a third. It's easier to take multiple for the higher use cases than it is to like size down for the like everyday use.
No, totally. I see that. And then, you mentioned kind of the everyday use thing, which I saw you mention somewhere on Twitter like a couple of weeks ago, but you're like, you're sort of envisioning this in a way. Obviously it can still be used, say like athletes, if you're looking for like a cognitive boost for like, I don't know, spelling bee or a tournament or something like that. But like in terms of everyday use, is this something that you see kind of being integrated into people's lives as like, just like a daily supplement? So like similar to somebody taking just, I'm going to wake up and take my vitamin D, or going to wake up and take my fish oil, like maybe taking a sip of my ketone in the morning just becomes kind of like my daily supplement. Was that sort of one of the ideas behind this kind of rebranding or the new product?
Yeah, 100%. The big thesis on it is that people should spend more time with elevated ketone levels. And so you don't just do that by like drinking a ton on the weekend. It's like, it's an ongoing area under the curve consistency. So yeah, it's this everyday thing, and you can have it in the morning as a pick me up. That's like when like friends who are not like super big nutrition nerds are like, oh, okay, this is cool, it can do all these things, but like, how do I actually use it? The really simple answer is, yeah, just have it in the morning, nice smooth energy boost to start the day. And then like, if you want to double click into that, it's like, yeah, you can have it as a pre-workout or post-workout recovery. You can have it for like all these different occasions throughout the day. But I think the simplest one is just like, yeah, in the morning with if you take supplements, or coffee, or blended mushroom blend, whatever people are having these days, like alongside of that, like have a serving of ketones.
Yeah, maybe as a nightly ketone nightcap instead of a cocktail.
That's something interesting. We should talk more about sleep. So yeah, and I think another really interesting topic is alcohol replacement. I know that Ben Greenfield, who has one of the top 10 health and fitness podcasts, and we've been on his podcast. We'll go on it again soon. Definitely will be a good episode to check out. He's really into the alcohol replacement side because you get this like little lift, right? It's kind of like behind your eyeballs. You feel a little bit more like just alert and perky. It's nice. It's not the same as being drunk at all, but it's some sort of a buzz, and it's like you're getting, instead of ethanol, which is bad for you, you're getting ketones, which are good for you. So it's like this really nice alcohol replacement that I think that use case might take off too. Yeah, we should talk about sleep and recovery.
Yeah. No, we for sure can. Let's do that. So other applications kind of exogenous ketones, I've again talked with kind of Brianna Stubbs about the performance benefits of that. And, I think that's still an interesting area, but I'm becoming like less interested almost in the performance aspects of ketones. Not that they're no longer interesting or relevant, but in terms of like, let's not talk about like athletes taking these to boost performance, but just like boosting health and all these other metrics. So Michael, you mentioned sleep, and we can talk about that. So I think maybe kind of buckets, maybe we could finish, our conversation today talking about maybe ketones in terms of sleep, maybe ketones in terms of maybe some of the therapeutic uses for diseases, and then also kind of the recovery aspect. Because I know Latt and Jeff have recently kind of published an article on ketones for like recovery from athletic performance. So I think that's interesting. So, but yeah, maybe let's just talk about sleep since we're kind of there. So regarding sleep, and having elevated ketones maybe at nighttime. Latt, Michael, are you guys aware of maybe the benefits that might be there? I know I've read some stuff on the fact that maybe ketones might help with sleep, but what's kind of the evidence there?
I think from science point of view, ketones have shown to have anxiolytic effect, sort of like relaxation and to sort of counter whatever stimulation that we're so used to, on our daily lives, whether it's coffee or like, whatever. But in terms of sleep,
too much TikTok after dinner.
Too much TikTok, too much blue screens or like. But I think we haven't seen, or at least I haven't seen any studies specifically looking at exogenous ketone and sleep. Would love to actually look at that, especially if it's correlated with increased risk of certain things of either obesity or like even like traumatic brain injury patients having sleep problems, those kind of areas are very interesting. But I think anecdotally, Michael, you want to talk on that?
Well, I was just going to say that there's more science around like elevated glucose being bad for sleep. Like if you eat a lot of sugar before bedtime, it's bad. So yeah, wanted to point that out. And then the recovery stuff is interesting too. It's like different from sleep, but it's related because the protocol in the Hespel paper was that people were taking it before sleep. Yeah. So
exactly.
So it's like sleep. I guess we can transition. It's like from sleep into like recovery topic because it's like it's all connected, right? It's like
yeah. Because
you want to run through like what?
Yeah, that was exactly why Jeff and I decided to write the paper on recovery, because after examining all the literatures that has been out in terms of acute performance use or pre-workout use, it shows very little improvement, if not at all. Like some papers actually show no difference. But the Haspel's paper that used for recovery strategy, they were given protein, carbs, and ketones after workout and before sleep. So that after 3 weeks, it showed an improvement of 15% of work output. And that is very significant. And suddenly we realize that the compounding factor of using ketones together with your gold standard nutrition strategy as a recovery strategy it actually has a much bigger effect over time, and you can measure that. And that was what sort of got us started and looking into different areas and what are the stipulations around ranges of blood BHB. What else should you take on top of just ketones? Obviously we have seen a ketone also increase leucine mediated mTOR activation, which increases protein synthesis. And then we also have seen the glycogen sparing effect, both in the acute use and also in recovery. Now, having that spare glycogen during recovery is very important because of the energy needed, when you're sleeping technically fasted, and having that extra tank of fuel as well to help with recovery.
Yeah, so and those would be the two primary mechanisms you'd say that the recovery might be enhanced, is through the maybe enhanced protein synthesis via the mTOR stimulation, and then the maybe glycogen sparing during exercise, and then perhaps maybe some enhanced glycogen replenishment after exercise, say if you consume it with a carbohydrate protein meal.
Exactly. And then also I'm sure like sleep quality has something to do with it. I mean, we haven't looked at any data on sleep quality, but I'm sure that also plays a role as well. And over time, these athletes also, there's another interesting point, is that they saw an increase in calorie intake, which corresponds with the improvement of work output, which I think was quite interesting because exogenous ketones have been shown to suppress ghrelin and suppress appetite. But these athletes, while working out and taking ketones together with proper nutrition, they actually needed more food to produce more work output.
Yeah, and so that was actually, so for that study, I remember that being kind of one of the main criticisms. People were criticizing that it was the overtraining study that we're referring to, right? Because they said, oh, well, yes, but the ketone group, they ate more. And so that's why they didn't experience many of the same overtraining symptoms as the other group. But like, even if they did consume more and that was the reason for their enhanced performance, I think that's interesting because perhaps in some way the ketones were allowing them to maintain their caloric intake and then prevent overtraining. So it's like, yeah, that's maybe one of the confounders that they didn't control for caloric intake. But if ketones were mediating that effect, then I think that's just as interesting. Exactly.
Because it's not like they are, giving this group of people is like, here, have more food. But it's like they want to eat more. They feel like they're hungrier and they want to eat more. So that on its own, that behavioral change on its own, it's very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think so too as well. It was a really interesting study. So I hope maybe they have some stuff going on where they're following up on that.
Hopefully with some Ketone 2.0 too.
Yeah,
we are in discussion, sort of talking with Peter Haskell as well, and he's very interested to try it out.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
I think one way to frame it is like we're pro ketones in a very pragmatic way, which is just like let's see what they're useful for. Let's see how the space evolves, and like there might be ketone 3.0. Like there might be better ways. We're not dogmatically attached to any one thing besides making the best product experience. And so it's really interesting to see the shifting in our understanding of like, hey, is this really for performance or is it more for recovery? Or like maybe it's good for performance for some people, and like you kind of got to see it, and like completely welcoming that. Like I don't want to be like snake oil salesman or like, oh, like definitely use this molecule that we invented and like, it does everything. You can wash your windows with it. Like it's more of a like there's a lot of promise here. We want to work with every scientist in every area and supply them with this nutritional primitive and see what the understanding is. And like there's a lot of things ketones don't do, right? Like there's a lot of things that they're not going to be good for. But another way to think about it too is like carbohydrates have evolved a lot. I think actually Brianna said this, like kind of planted this notion, which is like, Gatorade launched in the 1970s, and there's been decades of compounding innovation on it, and to where now it's like you have like the state-of-the-art ones and like Morton and Goo, and it's like they're a lot more advanced than like V1 carb drinks in the 70s. It's like you're parallelizing like maltodextrin plus fructose plus this, plus they'll put in like some BCAAs in there so you can you can make energy out of that. Like, and so we're in very much like first chapter of where ketones are. Excited to see where that space evolves. I think had a question. I want to reply to that. Make sure we cover some of it, at least around like therapeutic. I know that's almost its own whole separate episode, because there's like cardiovascular, there's cognitive, there's a lot in there. But maybe we can give like the overview, or how do you want to attack it? Great.
Yeah, maybe we could just do kind of a large scale 30,000 foot view of maybe some of like maybe in your opinion, Latt, some of the more interesting therapeutic areas where exogenous ketones might be applied. I'm really interested in, like, I've seen some papers recently where, the exogenous ketones, and this may have even been, I think it might have been obese individuals, but kind of like otherwise healthy, improve like vascular function, which I was astonished to see. Like some of these things, like you said, Michael, like, you don't know what ketones might be able to be used for, and then somebody tries it in a study and it boosts this. You're like how the hell does that happen? Like, what's the mechanism? But I don't know. But we'll figure that out later. But it's just so fascinating. But what are some of like the major areas, Latt, where you think maybe there is considerable evidence, or maybe where you expect some evidence to maybe emerge in the future on therapeutic uses of ketones?
Yeah, there are quite a few very, very interesting, exciting areas that I'm really looking forward to. So one definite area is the cognitive impairment. I think because the area of cognition has always been tied to ketogenic diet for a long time now. So the emergence of exogenous ketones essentially gave them an option to dose it at a more controlled level to make sure that you can control the blood BHB level. So NIH is currently doing a study using exogenous ketones to look at Alzheimer's and dementia. So that's definitely something to look out for. Diabetes is a very pleasantly surprised area, I would say, because I wasn't expecting exogenous ketones to play a role in diabetes, but because of the glucose lowering effect of exogenous ketones, University of British Columbia, they published a couple of papers in healthy individuals, obese individuals, as well as diabetic individuals. They saw an improvement in their blood glucose control. And this only means like more questions come out of that, right? How long would you take it for? How long does the effect last? And is this replacing the medication, or is this healthier? All that will come. And I think we should look forward to more long-term study for sure, especially now that 2.0 is out. Hopefully we are getting more affordable exogenous ketones in many more people's hands, and so that they can take it on a more regular basis, and then we can assess how effective it is in controlling chronic diseases, which essentially will live with you like on an everyday basis, right? Another area that I'm certainly looking out for is cardiovascular disease, as you look at, because I personally have my personal interest in cardiovascular disease. And a group in Denmark, they showed improvement in recovery post myocardial infarction, so post heart attack. And most of the time you will see hypertrophy following myocardial infarction as a compensatory mechanism, and eventually lead to like all sorts of irregularities.
This is in rats, right? Models.
Animal
models. Okay, just to make sure. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to ask that too.
No, but like it's very, very promising, right? But I think let's
sure.
Yeah. Because like things like heart attack and traumatic brain injury, it's really hard to say okay, or to like deliver the ketones right at the time of like the heart attack or like at brain injury. That I think that's the biggest challenge of those studies to be done in humans. But nonetheless, I think if we get it into healthcare providers who believe enough to actually test it out, I'm sure like we can get into the hands of these patients within the time frame. So in cardiovascular disease, they saw a mitigation of the hypertrophy. They saw definitely improved recovery after myocardial infarction. Not so much effect on the infarct size itself, but the recovery certainly that is significant. So that on its own is like great. Like, so let's start looking at different mechanisms of action. Why does it do that? Some postulate that It's because, when you have ischemia, when you have lack of substrate and lack of oxygen, you obviously, the damage occur because you just don't have any substrate to create energy, and the heart has to keep pumping, and oxidative damage occur and all that. But ketones then provide that sort of energy, that sort of efficiency in utilizing oxygen and being in that oxidative pathway, and create the energy that's needed for that deficit. So same with Alzheimer's as well, energy deficit in the brain, insulin resistance in the brain that is not, responding well to any form of signal to take in glucose and metabolize it. Ketones can provide that energy to sort of compensate. So all those mechanisms of action, I think people are starting to look into, but obviously people are definitely, especially laymen and listeners, they're very interested in the application side of things. It's like, at the end of the day, is like, tell me what works and tell me how it works, how much I need to take, how often, and when will I be a superhuman.
Right. Well, yeah, maybe no superhuman qualities, but I think especially with the 2.0, and when people get their hands on it and are now able to afford it, I think that as the research continues to come out, people will start to adopt ketones, because as of yet, I know that they're highly discussed, but they haven't really been adopted by many people in terms of people who are using them. I think that deals just with the cost prohibitive nature of the previous generations. And so it's exciting to see that there will be an affordable option, in that, down the line, we could have reduced rates of diseases and all kinds of things due to the fact that these are ubiquitous as just vitamin B or something like that. So it's very exciting.
It's been like flying cars or VR, as they're like, oh, it's gonna happen in the next 10 years for sure. And it's I don't know, maybe we'll see flying cars, but we're definitely I think have gotten there with ketones. I don't, still a lot more to do, but I think we've come much, at least at the product level, I think we've made something that can do that. Now it's on us to, do the good work of educating people. So, we're doing things like we're going to launch on the feed. They're an awesome partner. With us, we're launching into Sprouts, they're the nation's second largest natural food store besides Whole Foods. They're great. So, just doing the brass tacks of actual business building and getting the word out there, training the people that work at Sprouts on what the 101 is on a ketone, right? So there's a lot of, I would say, hand-to-hand combat of getting the message out there, because it's funny, I'd say 99% of people have no idea what a ketone is, and then the 1%, it's they have this crazy light bulb. It almost reminds me of Twitter, or crypto,
Yeah.
where it's most people, especially a few years ago, most people are what is this? But then once you really dive into the rabbit hole, and you're like, wow, Bitcoin, digital gold, it's this light bulb goes off, and then all you can think about is I want to put all my money into Bitcoin. And it's a similar thing with ketones. Most people don't know what it is, but then once you listen to 1, 2, 3 podcasts and do a little bit of poking around, you're like, wow, I want more ketones. I want to be elevated ketones. And then meanwhile, 99% of the world is yet to know what it is. So we have our work cut out for us for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy. Yeah. And the fact that though people can measure ketones too, I think it makes it very interesting that people can use it. If I'm taking a vitamin D supplement, I can't just say oh, I've been taking this for a week. What do my vitamin D levels look like? I have to go to Quest and I got to pay $40 for a blood test. I can use a ketone meter at my own house and be oh, this is working in a matter of, 30 minutes to an hour. And from day to day, I can see that this is working, and then also feel the subjective benefits too without measuring. So
yeah. One last topic, a little bit of a additional bullet point on just overall therapeutic. I know, Latt, I think you described it super well on the cutting edge there. One other area I think is super interesting is TBI, traumatic brain injury, concussions. Maybe we can say a little bit more there. I can say my general understanding. Latt, feel free to fill in. And I know we have some grant applications in flight around this, that basically, when there's a TBI, when there's a concussion, there's some amount of damage done on the moment of impact. And there's additional continued damage over the trailing 72 hours, where you have this swelling of tissue, the penumbra around the injury, where you're not able to get sufficient nutrition into the brain. And so there's a hypothesis that, well, okay, ketones that are smaller and they take less oxygen to metabolize, they can recover cognitive ability. So that's I know, as Latt said, it's you can't take two identical groups of humans and conk half of them over the head, but there are a lot of TBIs and like, skiing and
Mhm.
football and people jumping out of airplanes and flight school in the military. So there are instances where you have like, it's not good, but you do have like somewhat predictable rates of TBI, and you can start experimenting at different interventions.
Yeah, I know Dr. D'Agostino is doing a lot of research on that, but yeah, Latt, if you want to add a little bit on that, we can definitely talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
area.
we have sort of a grant application in process right now to look at military population, because that is a very high risk group of TBI. So we are hopefully trying to pull off a pilot translational study in chronic TBI patients. So sort of like they've taken it, so just to make things easier, rather than focusing on acute, we're like, okay, if it does make a difference for chronic TBI patients, after a few years after they had TBI, and we still can see a difference with exogenous ketones, then we can say we can take this data, to authorities, to grant funding bodies and all that, and say that, look, if these people are seeing some improvements, we can certainly try, at an acute level and see how much difference it actually can make. So when someone gets a traumatic brain injury, like Michael said, acutely, what we have seen and what we know is that there's increase in glucose uptake. Now, it still remains unknown whether or not the increased glucose uptake is correlating with increased glucose utilization. So we don't know the glucose is actually getting pull into glycolysis, because some studies saw the increase in lactate and pyruvate, which means glycolysis is upregulated, which makes sense. But then certain studies actually show decrease in glycolysis. Instead, the sugar is being shunned towards the pentose phosphate pathway. And some studies postulate that the pentose phosphate pathway is essential for the recovery of the damage recovery process and mechanism. So that's acute. And then after 7 days and beyond, months to years after, they slowly saw a hypometabolism of glucose in the brain, which also increases the risk for other cognitive impairment, such as dementia, which I find very interesting, because one is a sort of chronic disease, and then the other is literally an injury. But the similarities in metabolic dysfunction is what got me very interested in, what can we do to modify that and make a difference here. So that's the mechanism of action in general. And how does ketone actually play a role here? So the fact that, you get increase in metabolism acutely, and fat can't get past blood-brain barrier, but ketones can, and you're already taking up all the glucose, what else have you got left? Right? And if you can use the ketone to provide the energy that is then needed for the damage recovery, maybe the damage will be less, or maybe the after effect will be less. So same thing with the hypometabolism long term. Why is it not responding to this insulin signals? Why is it not responding to the glucose transporters? What if we substitute that with a different substrate, such as ketone? Well, that then fix that energy deficit, fix that metabolic dysfunction, hence connecting that sort of cognitive performance into an impaired person.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that there is some kind of data too in terms of, ketones. They're kind of cited as being like this cleaner burning fuel, perhaps like generating a little bit less free radicals during, I guess, ketone metabolism. So I'm sure that would maybe favor them for using that as like a metabolic substrate as well.
Yeah. And the very interesting thing is, because ketone is such a primitive, like evolutionarily, we are readily prepared to metabolize ketones. In all these studies, even in heart or in brain, while the other substrates are gated by transporters like glucose transporters or fatty acid transporters, ketones actually it is almost not gated, and the uptake and utilization increases as the availability increases, which I find very interesting, because basically the organs are saying that, okay, this substrate is somewhat special. If it's available, let's bring them in as much as possible and use it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's actually something I wasn't aware of, that the kind of the transport rate was sort of scaled with the availability, which doesn't necessarily work the same way with something like maybe fatty acids or glucose, where you can kind of saturate your transporters, or sometimes they don't even work if you're, insulin insensitive or something like that.
Exactly. Was MCT.
There's no ketone insensitivity that I know of.
Yeah. No, that was the I think the cardiovascular paper did a little graph quite nicely correlating the availability versus the uptake, because they measured the artery going in and artery going out and measured the substrates. So that showed a very nice graph, which I'm like, well, that's great. Like, the more it is available, the more the heart takes up and uses for energy, and then the output is that it's better recovery. I'm like, great, win-win.
Yeah, no doubt. So yeah, so many different applications. And, Michael, as you mentioned earlier, there's just almost kind of infinite ways in which we can continue to explore ketones. And I think, they're not going to be proven to be useful for everything, but until we really test that out in a kind of a scientific setting, we don't know. So I think it's an exciting frontier that's only going to continue to kind of expand. And, I'm glad that we were able to talk about some of the applications, about the new product. This has been a great conversation. So before kind of I ask you all to plug where people can find you, if people want to learn about the Ketone 2.0, maybe get on the wait list and learn more about like ordering it when it eventually drops, where can they do that?
Yeah, check out hvmn.com. It's a big, you can't miss ketones once you're there. Take a look, click around, learn. If you have any questions, email our team. We're happy to answer. We have a ton of info around all of the studies that we've been talking about and all the ongoing research. And yeah,
awesome.
that's let's check it out. We're going to be available for full public availability in January, so you can join the wait list anytime between now and then. We're letting some pre-sale early access off the wait list between now and then, but definitely January will be like full ripping and roaring.
Okay, awesome. And you mentioned pre-recording that I might have some sitting in my mailbox, so I'm gonna maybe go over there and check afterwards, and maybe have to do a taste test in the next week or so. I'm very excited to try it. So
yeah, please do send us a video of you taste testing it and measuring the ketones.
I will for sure do that. And so yeah. Anyway, Michael Latt, thanks for joining me. So can you just quickly, if people want to find more about you at Latt, maybe we'll start with you, and then Michael, where can they find you, whether it's on social media, website, anything like that?
I'm on Latt Mansor on there, so you can find me on there, and also latt@hvmn.com.
Awesome.
And my handle on Twitter is BDM_runner, and I'm at michaelbrandt.co. BRANDT. michaelbrandt.co.
Cool. And
I'm pretty active. So yeah, I message back. Like,
very active. Yeah.
Hit me up. Yeah. Some would say too active. So yeah, hit me up. I'm here.
No such thing as too active on Twitter. Take it from me. So all right, guys. Well, this has been a blast. I'm looking forward to the new product, and I'm sure it'll be a successful launch in January when it does come out. But I appreciate you both joining me on the podcast today, and hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Appreciate you as well, Brady.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. See ya.
Bye.